Hello, today we're going to be talking about 4 books about obsessive people. On the list, we have Notes on a Scandal by Zoe Heller, The Collector by John Fowles, My Nemesis by Charmaine Craig, and a book that I'm not going to say the title of by Chris Kraus. I'm just going to say here that I can't promise you that I'm going to read every single one of these books. I might switch out one for another. I might just read 3 of them. For some reason, I haven't been all that compelled by any of these recently. I have read Notes on a Scandal and finished it, and I'm going to talk to you about it right now, but I don't want to pick up that last one that I'm not going to say the title of this early on in the video because I want to cater to the gods above at YouTube. I don't like the formatting of it, and I just can't make myself pick it up. It's too tall of a book, and then it's got these absolutely horrible margins. But flipping through it, I can see that it's epistolary, so maybe I'm gonna read it, but maybe I'm not. Okay, I'm just saying you can't hold me to all of these. Now let's talk about Notes on a Scandal. I have the absolutely horrible movie edition, but I found this at a book sale for $2, and it's not at my library, and I couldn't pass it up. I also have this compulsion to peel the plastic off of soft covers that are shiny like this, and so I ripped the shit out of it, and then I colored it in with pen, and now it comes off on my finger a little bit when I touch it, and I did the exact same thing to the back. So this is ugly. I'm gonna try not to hold it up and force you to look at it. I read this at one point in public, and the whole time I just had it in my lap. I didn't want anybody to see what I was reading because I didn't want them to look it up and figure out what it was about, and I didn't want them to see this horrible cover. I was genuinely embarrassed to be holding this. So Notes on a Scandal follows Sheba, a woman who teaches high school pottery classes in England. I know it's not called high school, I'm sorry, I have absolutely no idea. All you need to know is that she has been charged with the assault of a 15-year-old because of an ongoing relationship that they've had. This book is following Sheba from Barbara's perspective. Barbara is an older teacher at the same school, and she has a kind of obsession with Sheba, an obsessive friendship, and she, in the aftermath of this, has become Sheba's caretaker. We learn this in the foreword, where we're getting a little bit of context about where they are now as it's coming down to the days of the trial. Barbara tells the audience in this foreword that she feels like she's really the one person fit to tell Sheba's story. This is very much written from her perspective. She tries to pretend she's unbiased, but it is so clouded by her bias. She has been Sheba's caretaker for the past 18 months since the news of this story broke and charges were pressed against her. So Barbara declares herself as the one person capable of telling this story, and then she begins the novel proper with Sheba's introduction to the school that Barbara has worked at for many years. Barbara is quite a bit older than her. Sheba's 40. It's not totally clear exactly how old Barbara is, but people treat her like she's very, very old. They often refer to her as a spinster. She refers to herself as a spinster. She lives a very solitary life. In some ways, it's kind of like the typical, crazy old cat lady sort of thing, but in other ways, there is nuance to her loneliness. And Sheba lives a very different life. She's married, she has 2 children, they're young teenagers, and she is also very, very wealthy. And her wealth, which she likes to downplay, is the reason that Barbara is originally compelled by her when she is brought in to teach at the school. She is a very alluring new teacher. She has this very specific, artsy kind of style. She's described as always wearing these, long, flowy, silky fabrics. She has her hair tied up in this artfully messy bun, and everyone is interested in her, but she doesn't, make friends immediately, which makes everyone all the more interested in her and feeling like she's maybe a little bit cold, but they all want to be the one that she chooses as her friend. Barbara isn't desperate. She's willing to bide her time, but she is immediately drawn in by Sheba. And this introduction to her is really interesting because we've seen a little bit of how she is in the present day in this foreword, where she's a sulking, moping, quiet, melodramatic kind of person. Here, she has a much stronger personality. She's obviously been really changed by the events of this scandal, but you don't really know exactly how she's been changed by it until you get closer to the end of the book. So one of the first important moments in Sheba's employment at this school is when she meets Stephen Connolly, the boy that she is later charged with the assault and grooming of. She meets him when she's on detention duty. He's not actually in any of her classes. She catches him drawing a woman's figure. She's an art teacher. She sees this very sexualized figure that he's copying off of an advertisement, and for some reason, she is very compelled by Stephen. She tells him that he has talent and that he should try drawing from real life. Then a little while later, he leaves an anonymous portrait for her. This is a portrait of her. It's incredibly sexualized, and while it is anonymous, she knows who it's from, and she thinks he's probably going to show up and make a pass at me. And then he does. He shows up to her pottery studio after class, and they start spending time together after school. She's teaching him about art, but she is mostly intrigued by him because she feels excited about being pursued. She's been married for a long time. She got married to an older man when she was very young. She feels like she missed out on a lot of her youth, and she has never really had a man pursue her with the persistence that Connolly does. So Barbara is the one writing this, and her presence as the narrator is always felt. And although she likes to kind of frame it as though she's writing about Sheba and Connolly's story and trying to get into why Sheba did what she did, this is also in a lot of ways Barbara's story. And it's really interesting how much of herself she imbues into this work, how much bias there is, and also how many little stories involving her and Sheba's relationship she tells, even though they really have nothing to do with Sheba and Connolly. She wants to think of herself as more important in Sheba's life than she actually was, because Sheba was so important in her life. So in Barbara's world at this time, she's upset with Sheba because Sheba has made friends with a music teacher named Sue, who Barbara thinks is dull and annoying. Barbara is a very, very negative and judgmental person. She is also not friends with Sheba. They're not even really acquaintances. Barbara just wanted to be the one that Sheba chose, and she wasn't. Sue was, and she thinks so lowly of Sue. This is a total blow to her. Though in reality, Sheba has not wronged her at all. She becomes very hostile towards her for no reason, and it's very frustrating because Sheba does not pick up on this hostility, even when it is so incredibly blatant. Barbara is also reminded at this point of a friend at the school who she used to have named Jennifer. They had this long friendship, and then one day Jennifer said, "I don't want to be friends with you anymore. You're too overbearing, you're too much, you're too obsessive, and if you don't leave me alone, I'm going to get the police involved with this." This is a friend that Barbara thinks about throughout this book, and that you always want to know the story of. I'll tell you right now, you never really get to learn what happened between Barbara and Jennifer, but you get a glimpse at what might have happened by seeing what happens between Barbara and Sheba. As Sheba and Connolly's relationship develops, and Sheba is trying to convince herself that she's not doing anything wrong, they're just spending time together, she's also telling herself that her desire was born out of Connolly being different, being someone who is interested in art unlike the other students that she teaches. But Barbara says that her interest was really anthropological, that Sheba comes from an upper class background, and Connolly is lower class or lower middle class, and she sees him, as Barbara says, almost like how we would see a monkey in a zoo. It's like this curiosity about their class difference, and about her thinking that Connolly doesn't fit in with her ideas of lower class people. Barbara says that this all makes him seem exotic to her. At one point, Connolly is sent in for detention with one of his friends, and Sheba is the one overseeing it, and they are really nasty to her the entire time. And she takes them out into the hallway to reprimand them, and she kind of like miserably fails at doing so. She's a new teacher. And while this is happening, Barbara walks by and she helps Sheba in this moment, and it brings the two of them quite a bit closer together. They become even better friends when they run into each other at a restaurant near the school where Sheba is having lunch with Sue. There's this really funny, like, underhanded competition between Sue and Barbara that you can't really tell whether or not it's just Barbara's perception. There's definitely a competition from that side, but you don't really know if Sue feels the same way. Though it does seem pretty clear that they both want Sheba's attention. But Sheba and Barbara are the two that become closer. Sue loses out on this when she rejects Sheba's invitation to come for dinner at her house. Sheba extends this to Barbara, and Barbara comes, and this really kicks off their friendship. After their relationship becomes physical, Sheba asks Barbara advice about what to do about Connolly, but she does not tell the whole story. She tells Barbara that there's a student who has a crush on her, and he tried to kiss her and she pushed him away. They have fully had sex at this point. They are fully like in this very secret relationship. Sheba is in love with him. She thinks that they are in love. That is her story. That's her version of events. But of course she can't say that to Barbara. She knows that this is wrong. It's not like she knows on some level. She absolutely unequivocally knows that what she's doing is wrong. In some ways it does seem like she might be looking for validation from Barbara here, though she hasn't said anything at all about her own blame in this, her own fault. it does seem like she wants Barbara to downplay it. Barbara says this is really serious. You got to go to the headmaster. And she's like, no. I'll just have a conversation with him. I'll just tell him he can't keep coming to the studio. It's not until 8 months into Sheba and Connolly's relationship, where her and Barbara are quite close friends, that Barbara realizes what's happening between the two of them. She's often going over to Sheba's house for dinner or going on like little shopping trips together, and one day Sheba invites her to go see fireworks with her and her family. She goes, and then in this like mass of people trying to leave the field where they were watching the fireworks from, Sheba splits off from the group and they can't find her until Barbara sees her under a tree talking to Connolly. And Sheba sees Barbara seeing Connolly. So when they get back to Sheba's house, she takes Barbara down into the basement where her pottery studio is, and she tells her, I'm in a relationship with Connolly. It seems like she is kind of giddy at being able to relay this secret to someone. And Barbara also says that she loves being incomprehensible. Barbara tries to fight against it, and Sheba is like, no, we're in love. I know you don't get it. I know you don't understand. Barbara's like, you can go to prison. And she's like, I know, but you can't jail me for being in love. Barbara, when she leaves Sheba's house, is enraged. She feels lied to. She feels like she wasn't considered, that Sheba never thought about how Barbara would feel about this. Like I've said, Barbara thinks she is so much more important in Sheba's life than she actually is. Really, the driving force of Sheba's life is seeing this boy. As she's driving home, there's this scene where she's just simmering, just thinking about how angry she is. And then she looks up and there's a little girl in the car in front of her, and her eyes are like wide as she stares back at Barbara. And Barbara realizes that she has been slamming her hand down on the steering wheel, so much so that there's a red welt on her palm. While Barbara is angry, she doesn't do anything with this information until quite a while later, when one of her annoying coworkers asks her out to lunch. During this time, she is fighting with Sheba. I don't think Sheba knows that they're fighting. There is no communication from Barbara whatsoever. She's so incredibly underhanded in everything that she tries to convey about how she's feeling. Like, in the beginning, before her and Sheba were even friends, when she was being so hostile and rude towards her, trying to like psychically let her know that she had done something wrong without ever telling her what, because it was unreasonable to think that being friends with Sue was doing something wrong. That is how she approaches all communication, even when they're friends. So they had gotten into a fight because Sheba was so focused on seeing Connolly, who she considers her boyfriend, disgusting. He's 15 years old. She's also married. She's so focused on seeing him that she doesn't give Barbara the attention that Barbara wants, because her cat is sick, and her cat is really sick, and she loves this cat. And it is, in some ways, kind of reasonable for Barbara to think that Sheba should care for her. She has given so much to Sheba, helped her so much in her life, kept this secret for her, and Sheba just completely ignores her, literally runs out of her own house on her way to see this boy. When Barbara has just been given the news that her cat is like imminently going to die, it sucks. There's even a moment where Barbara reaches for Sheba, Sheba pulls away, and Barbara ends up falling off of the chair that she's on and smashing her hip, and Sheba just doesn't care. She's like, you'll be okay to drive home, right? And then she runs out of there. So Barbara has kind of cut contact with Sheba during this time that her coworker invites her out for lunch, and she's lonely. And so she accepts, even though she, over the course of this book, multiple times has talked about how irritating he is, how weird he is. She goes, and she thinks maybe he's interested in me. He takes her back to his apartment and he tells her, I have feelings for someone at work. Guess who? And she says, me? And he says, oh my God, no, what the fuck? She's like, okay, you don't need to act so offended. He's like, no, I'm sure you were beautiful when you were younger. Gross. He says, no, I'm in love with Sheba. And in this moment, Barbara wants to hurt him. She also thinks that she can drive him absolutely mad. She says something about how sometimes you look at someone and you can just tell that they have the seed of madness in them and they just need someone to water it. And so she tells him, Sheba would never like you back. You're not her type. Her type is young boys. Haven't you noticed her relationship with that Connolly boy? Instantly, she regrets this, but she can't take it back. She's riddled with guilt, but over time, she manages to convince herself that he's not going to do anything with this information, that he's too meek. In Sheba's life, she's having a lot of problems with her older child, Polly, who at one point runs away to Scotland. Sheba calls up Barbara and tells her what's happening, and her and Barbara go together to Scotland. Here, Sheba gets into a huge fight with Polly. She ends up slapping her. She regrets this, and she knows that she's probably going to get in shit with her husband once they get back home to England. But what she does when she gets back home to England is immediately tries to call Connolly because she wants him to, like, comfort her after this really tough situation that she's in with her daughter. He doesn't answer, so she goes to his house, where she goes to a payphone outside, and she calls him, and she says, "Can you come outside? I really need you. Like, I'm having a hard time." And he acts like a 15-year-old boy, because he is a 15-year-old boy. She's asking for some sort of emotional maturity from him, not emotional maturity that she's going to get here. Then she waits outside his house, and she sees a little while later as he lets a girl and a boy his age out the front door, and he kisses the girl. And she goes into like almost shock. And it's really not long after that it all falls apart. She gets a phone call from the principal, who tells her that there has been a serious accusation leveraged against her and she needs to come in at 8 the next morning. And then Connolly's mom shows up at her house and starts berating her, tries to physically fight her, gets booted out, and everything just falls apart from there. It becomes a huge nationwide scandal. It doesn't really get into it at the end here, but over the course of the book, there has been quite a bit of information about how this has been treated by the media. This book was written in the early 2000s, and it does have that accurate perception of how women who preyed on their students were treated in the media. There's kind of like two sides to it. It gets into the difference between male and female predators. And almost all of it is really disgusting. I mean, even just the framing of it as a scandal, which is literally like the title of the book, says a lot about perpetration and victimhood. I have been calling her victim Connolly throughout this book because that is what Barbara calls him in her relaying of events. And even that is a choice that kind of strips him of his victimhood in a way. By calling him his last name, I think it is trying to age him up, make him seem more adult, more at fault for this. Barbara does explicitly say that Connolly has fault for this, that she doesn't see him as a victim. She is one of the people who holds the opinion that any young man would want to have sex with a beautiful teacher. It's horrible. You're not supposed to agree with her. The last few chapters of the book, maybe like 20 or so pages at the end, is just the present day as they're waiting for the court dates, as it's just Barbara and Sheba together, Barbara as some sort of caretaker for Sheba. Sheba finds this manuscript that we've been reading, and she realizes that Barbara is the reason that she got caught, because it was that coworker who finally outed her for this. They get into a huge fight, but she has no one else to turn to. So at the end of the story, she falls back into Barbara's arms. I think it is absolutely fascinating how the dynamic between these two women, their roles have been reversed over the course of the story. I think it was done very skillfully and very slowly until all of a sudden you look and Barbara is the one who holds all of the power. Sheba is the one who's relying on Barbara, where it's been reversed the whole time. When I first finished this, I felt a little bit disappointed. I felt like it had kind of been building up to something that never really came. And then when I thought more about their relationship and how their characters have evolved over the course of the story and this role reversal, I realized what it was doing and I appreciated it a lot more. Because this isn't a narrative-heavy book. This is really a character study of a cast of characters who are horrible and selfish, and throughout the book, they're justifying their thoughts and actions. And while they are horrible and selfish, this book allows you to understand them enough that you hate them, but you also care about what they're going to do next. I think it has just enough empathy for the loneliness of these two women, where it's never excusing them. It is always a condemnation, but it allows you to feel something other than just pure hatred towards them. I thought this was a really interesting method of storytelling, this very clear presence of the narrator throughout the entire book, her insistence that this is Sheba and Connolly's story and she's the perfect one to tell their story, but then her inability to take herself out of the story, though she's positioning herself as unbiased, as a neutral bystander. She is, I mean, really the main character. I don't think the main character is Sheba. She doesn't understand her own insignificance in the story that she says she's telling, and then despite that, she has this timeline of events, and the places where she puts stickers with gold stars are points of significance in her and Sheba's relationship. But they really have nothing to do with Sheba and Connolly. She is not important in this story. She has nothing to do with this story. While yes, she is the one person who Sheba has confided in, that was really just like coincidental. She puts it out there as though this is a log, but really it's a diary. I thought that her very passive-aggressive and completely ineffective style of communication really reflected how dishonest she is and closed off she is with herself. I just really loved the ways in which Barbara was unreliable in this story. I also loved how this book was written. I thought that it had a dry, witty, British sense of humor. The choices of adjective and simile felt very observant and specific. Like at one point, she describes the look on Sue's face as the deeply private pain of someone who has just slammed her thumb in the car door. Or she's at the grocery store and she says that the man in front of her in the checkout laid his purchases on the conveyor belt with a terrible, shy precision. I just like it. I think it paints a really vivid picture, and it always is making you think like, I never would have thought to describe something like that, but I totally understand why she did, and it's giving me a new lens on how to look at it, even with the smallest things, like a man in front of her at the grocery store. While it is well written, well conceived, well constructed, I think there were some issues with it. It was written in the early 2000s. It has a very early 2000s depiction of fat people and of disabled people. I thought their last names were almost laughably on the nose. Barbara's last name is Covet, and Sheba's last name is Hart. It felt just way cornier than anything else in the rest of the book. At times, it also felt a little bit like there was an exaggeration of how terribly behaved school children are. But then at the same time, I think it did have a really good understanding of how teenagers talk, or at least how I, a Canadian, see how British teenagers talk. I think this had very, very good dialogue. It felt very natural, while at the same time, it often felt like it was setting a tone or like conveying something more, something a little bit unsettling. And I think that's really hard to do both. I understand people who call this a modern classic. I think it held back just the right amount. I really enjoyed this perspective. I think it was just very solidly well written. I don't think this was a very memorable book, but I do think that it was worth reading. And despite not having all that much plot, I felt really compelled by every character in this. They were fascinating and so well developed. I'll be honest with you, I haven't decided what I'm going to read next, so I'll get back to you having read probably one of these books. Probably. Maybe it'll be something else. I'll see you later. Hello, I'm here to talk to you about The Collector by John Fowles, and I am sick, so if halfway through this clip, suddenly the lighting has changed, just know that I had to go lie down for a little bit, okay? But I am being so brave about it. I'm toughing it out for you. This is a very typical story of man with sort of incel ideologies, kidnaps a woman and keeps her in his basement, thinking that he can convince her that she is in love with him the same way he's in love with her. This is a tired story at this point in time, but this was written sometime in the 1960s, and so it doesn't feel really, really overdone, even though you can very clearly see how little this trope has evolved over time. It's more just interesting to see the origins of this story, despite the fact that so many recent novels about obsession or about men fucking kidnapping women follow the exact same plot beats as this. So this follows Fred, a lonely, socially isolated, and awkward man who wins the lottery. He uses this money to send his aunt and his cousin, who he has lived with for most of his life since his parents died when he was young, off to Australia to visit their family. And while he is home alone in England, he starts building a fucking bunker in the basement of a house that he purchases. He goes through the process of building this bunker knowing that the object of his obsession and affection is this woman named Miranda. This is a very intensive and deliberate process, going and checking out this house in the middle of nowhere, buying it, building this bunker all on his own so nobody gets suspicious about the fact that he's clearly planning on locking someone in here. And yet the entire time he's doing this, he is convincing himself that there is no level of premeditation, that this is just a fantasy that he has, that this object of his affection, Miranda, this 20-year-old art student who lives near his aunt's house, that he's never actually going to kidnap her. He just wants to. He just dreams about it. And then, of course he does. He has taken every step to make this a possibility. In trying to justify his actions and convince himself that this was never really going to happen, that he was never really going to follow through with it, he uses a very passive voice. He says that he saw the ad for the house in the Sunday papers, and then says, "The next morning, I was driving down to see it," as if he has no agency in this decision. So he builds a bunker, he outfits a van, and then he kidnaps this woman, Miranda, when she's leaving the movie theater. She is not the woman that he had idealized. Again, they have never spoken to each other. She is just someone that he has watched from afar, and he's decided that she's different from all other women, all the other women who won't give him a second look. She is far more combative and far more intelligent than the version of Miranda that he had idealized, and this makes convincing her to be in love with him pretty difficult. He keeps lying to her about why he's kidnapped her, pretending that there's some other third party involved and that he was just hired for this, but she always knows that he's lying, even if sometimes she plays along with it. He makes promises that he can't keep, namely being that he'll release her in 4 weeks' time, because he thinks to himself that it's inevitable that she's going to fall in love with him and that she won't have to live down here forever, that they'll live together as a normal couple in the upstairs of the house. Throughout Miranda's stay in the cellar, they're always trying to outwit each other. He never succeeds at this. She is always coming very close to succeeding, but never quite. At one point, in an attempt to escape, she pretends that she has appendicitis, and he does outwit her here. He runs upstairs, pretends that he's really upset and overwhelmed and he doesn't know what to do, and he leaves the doors open. And after a few minutes, she comes upstairs totally fine. She makes eye contact with him and just turns around and walks back down the stairs. She is very cunning, and she knows how to get under his skin, but she can never quite push it far enough to allow her to escape. He's always just enough on edge that he sees through her. When the 4 weeks is up, Miranda suggests that they throw a party, and at this party that's just the two of them, they're both lying to each other. He knows that he's never going to release her, and she is really trying to convince him that it's a good idea to release her. She's saying, like, once I'm out, we're going to be best friends back in London. I have so many different women I'm going to introduce you to. You're going to find a girl that you really like. When he had been shopping for this party, he saw a ring in a jewelry store, and he bought it for her, knowing that she would reject his marriage proposal, and then he proposes anyways. She rejects him. They're upstairs, and she's like bound, I think, but they hear a car outside, and she really quickly kicks a log out of the fireplace. It starts burning the carpet, and she starts trying to get out. She doesn't succeed. He subdues her. He brings her back downstairs. He deals with burning carpet, and after this, she's no longer pretending to be kind to him. Now that the jig is up, she is just cruel all the time. A lot of ignoring him, a lot of digs. Again, she knows how to get under his skin. At one point, she makes another attempt to leave by hitting him over the head with an axe, but she can't quite injure him enough, and he gets her back into the cellar again. Throughout this time, the two of them have had a lot of conversations, and she knows a lot about his psyche. The main thing being his neurotic views about sex. Obviously, she has been incredibly afraid of his potential to harm her in that way. But he hasn't. He won't even really touch her. At one point, they're outside, and she can feel that he wants to kiss her, but he doesn't. And he thinks of himself as so above other men, as almost absolved from the guilt of what other things he's done to her, because he hasn't touched her in that way. Sex to him is so significant. He has stigmatized it so much. So one day, in an attempt again to escape, she tries to teach him that sex is just an activity by seducing him, and it doesn't quite work. It's implied that he can't get it up. He tells her that a doctor has told him that he'll never be able to do it, which is just a lie that he comes up with. In trying to seduce him, Miranda has created an impassable rift between the two of them. Any other moments in this book where they've been fighting, it's mostly been Miranda being angry, and because he is so in love with her, and also because he has all the power, he is very willing to make himself smaller for her forgiveness. But here, he's the one that is really affected, and of course Miranda is not going to shrink herself down. In her attempt at seducing him, she has made herself just like any other woman, and he no longer has any respect for her. The two of them start interacting far less frequently. Miranda continues to go on hunger strikes, and then she tells him, if you don't let me live upstairs, even if I'm bound up there, I am going to kill you. And he says, I will only let you live upstairs if you let me take photos of you in compromised positions. And she knows that the implication is that he will have blackmail material on her. They strike up an agreement. He says that he's going to need to do some renovations upstairs to make essentially just another bunker, just one that has fresh air and light, unlike the cellar that she's been living in, but he's not actually doing it. Part 1, which has been all from his perspective, ends with Miranda being very, very ill and begging him to take her to a doctor. She keeps telling him she's going to die. She thinks she might have pneumonia. Part 2, which starts about 100 pages into this book, is Miranda's perspective. This is her diaries starting on the 7th night that she had stayed there. And it is a very different voice from his voice. It's very true to the form of journaling and to her inability to concentrate. It's a lot of very short, clipped sentences. You really feel like the author was getting into the head of someone who was trapped in a fucking bunker and writing like she would write on like a structural level. So this had every opportunity to be really repetitive. It is the two of them telling the same story, going over the same sequence of events, but it's told so differently, it never feels boring. Not only is it two very distinct voices, they're also really different in terms of form. He's telling this story in retrospect. There's all these allusions to something having gone wrong, and it's clear that he's in the position of telling it from the future. Like, they'll have a really nice conversation or something like that, and he'll be like, we can never do this again after everything that happened, like that kind of thing. But for her, these are diary entries. She's writing things as they happen. That means that the sequence of events is very different, and then of course, they have very different ideas of what events are important. With Miranda's diaries, it's also a lot more than just the story of her being stuck in this bunker. She is living in the past because she has no other choice of where to live. I mean, she has a few conversations with him every day, and then she's just stuck there alone. So a lot of what she talks about is this older artist guy, George. He's elitist, he has this superiority complex, and she, as a 20-year-old, upper class, posh art student, thinks very highly of him and his worldview. He is definitely a man who thinks he knows everything. So a lot of her diaries are stories of him, and at first, they are weirdly very interesting. You know, they have a very complex relationship. She's 20, he's like probably fucking 50. She keeps saying that if he was 20 years younger and physically attractive, that she would marry him in an instant. And she's told him before that she's not in love with him. There's not words for what she feels towards him. He very clearly is just trying to get her in bed, and she refuses and then catches him with one of her best friends. And she sees this friend as shallow and superficial, and it kind of ruins their relationship because she thought that he was special, that he was above being with a woman like that, and in turn, that made her special because of the attention that he gave her. It's very interesting how differently the two main characters idealize the object of their desires. With Miranda's perspective, we get to see a lot more of the thought behind her escape attempts. Obviously, she had put so much planning and deliberation into all of them, and we get the devastation when they fail. At the end of her diaries, when she's really, really sick and also has realized that he's not going to let her live upstairs like he's been saying, her diary entries become a lot more erratic and she stops dating them. Her last diary entry reads, oh God, do not let me die. God, do not let me die. Do not let me die. And then part 3 at page 227 switches back to his perspective. She does die. She dies not without a fucking fight and kind of brutally of a really, really high fever and some sort of pneumonia. It takes her a long time to die. She hallucinates. She's clearly in a lot of pain. She's struggling to breathe. It's days. And in these days, he keeps trying to go to a doctor, to talk to a doctor, not to bring her, but just talk to a doctor and say, I have a friend who's afraid of doctors. I just need some penicillin for him. But he keeps chickening out. And it kills her. Once she's dead, he starts getting really fucking paranoid. He's convinced that everyone around him is always staring at him because they can see a madness in him that he can't recognize himself, a madness that Miranda had pointed out to him many times. So he makes a plan to end his life beside her in the basement, sending a letter to the police that made it seem like they were two lovers who died like Romeo and Juliet. But on his way to get supplies to carry out this plan, he sees a young woman who looks exactly like Miranda. And then he realizes not even quite exactly like Miranda, but the book ends with him deciding not to die, with you knowing that this woman is going to be his next victim, and with him continuing on with the self-deluding that he's not actually going to kidnap her. He's just putting a plan in place because he likes to fantasize. It's an incredibly bleak ending of the cycle just starting anew. Despite the fact that this book took me so long to read, it didn't feel like it was as slow as it actually was in practice reading it. Like, I would think that I had read 15 pages and then it would have been like literally one, and yet it wouldn't feel as I was reading it like it was taking me a really long time or like it was overly dense or anything like that. I do think pacing wise, each section was just a little bit too long, and each of them within themselves felt repetitive. But like I said, his story and then her story never felt repetitive like as a whole. I felt like this book had a lot to say about class and morality. It's definitely critiquing Fred winning the lottery and then all of a sudden just like turning right to depravity as soon as he has the means to do so. But then it's also critiquing Miranda, who has grown up with the means and is very blind to her privilege. And I think that was a really good choice with Miranda's character. When you first start reading from her perspective, you quickly become quite aware that she's very snobbish, but she has an arc over the course of her diary entries, and it's an arc of self-awareness. I really liked how much more developed Miranda's character became once you were in her head and seeing things from her perspective. You had definitely never quite believed his ideas about her. Like, he would say things like, she doesn't look frightened, and you know she's scared out of her mind. Like, literally, when he first kidnaps her, she's tied and gagged in the back of his van, and he's like, her eyes didn't betray any fear. Of course she's afraid. And yet still, it's not until you're in her head that you understand that you have fallen somewhat for some of Fred's ideas about her. I enjoyed her really complex relationship with her situation and with him. I liked that it didn't fall into this like idiotic thing of like Stockholm syndrome, but that when she's planning to escape at one point, she says she's not sorry for the harm it will cause him, but she's not totally unsorry either. And later on, she realizes that she wouldn't have wanted this not to happen to her because she thinks she's changed so much as a person. She wouldn't have wanted to be stuck as who she was before, which is not quite who she wanted to be. It was really interesting how her journey into self-awareness clashed so much with Fred's self-delusions, how he is like so clinical and deliberate in the language that he uses and how he frames things, but then like conflicting with that is so incredibly convinced of his delusions. And I think those two things being completely at odds with each other really added to how unsettling he was. It wasn't just his thoughts and his actions that freaked you out about him, it was also the way that they were being told to you. I think I forgot to mention it, but he is a butterfly collector, like that's his hobby. Most covers of this book have a butterfly on them. The metaphor there is very clear and obvious, but it didn't feel too cliche because the book wasn't as repetitive as it could have been with it. It's only really mentioned a few times that he collects butterflies and traps them and kills them and keeps them in a drawer. I really liked that Miranda was not like a perfect victim. I liked that when you're reading from his perspective, you love her anger and her sarcasm, and then you get to her perspective, and for a while you're like, wow, she's a total fucking snob. Like, actually, she is quite irritating. And then she develops away from that. This book was extremely misogynistic in a way that was almost entirely deliberate. I think it was a product of its time. Does it say in many different ways women are weak? Yes, it does. I don't necessarily fault it for that. Most of the misogyny was a critique of that misogyny. Never at any moment did this not feel like a book written in the 60s, though. The writing was good. There were some good lines, some questionable use of commas that made it feel like a little bit stilted at times. It was fine. It was absolutely nothing special. I think that it was slow, but far slower than it felt while you were reading it. And mainly what I liked about this book was seeing the origin of this kind of trope. Like I said, this kind of story hasn't really evolved much in the past 60 years beyond this book. And if I had read this exact book written 5, 10, 15 years ago, I would have been like, okay, like, we've seen it before, like, come on. But reading this was somehow just a little bit more interesting, though really, really slow. And because it was so slow, it took me many days to read this, and I'm also sick, so it's harder to read. So I'm only reading 3 books for you. I'm sorry. I'm not going to be able to get the fucking video out if I read 4 books, okay? I'm about halfway through my Nemesis, and I will update you when I'm done with it. Much quicker read, but also maybe worse. I don't know yet. It could surprise me. It's okay so far. Listen, I'm gonna save it. Don't get me fucking started talking on this. I need to go lie down. Okay. Thank you for... No, it's not the end of the video. I'll see you later. Hello, it is the next day. I have finished what I wanted to do, and I'm here to talk to you about My Nemesis by Charmaine Craig. This follows a woman named Tessa. She's a writer, but in an academic nonfiction kind of way. She's kind of a scholar, and she strikes up this relationship with this man named Charlie, who is also a scholar, but he's more like a philosopher. Tessa and Charlie are both married. Tessa to a man named Milton. This is her second husband. She had a daughter with her first husband. Milton had 2 sons with his first wife, but their nest is empty now. And then Charlie is married to a woman named Wah, and they have adopted a teenager from somewhere, a teenager from Malaysia, but she is quite a bit more connected to Wah than she is to Charlie. Wah kind of like saved her, kind of sacrificed a lot to save this young woman from trafficking in Malaysia. So Milton and Tessa together become friends with Charlie. They strike up a correspondence because of one of his writings or one of her writings. It's very academic. They're always debating. They're not quite
quite having an emotional affair, but they're having like an intellectual affair with each other. Before Tessa and Milton ever meet Wah, Charlie has come to stay with them quite a few times when he goes to the other coast where they live for conferences. Then they come to his house and they meet her, and immediately there is a rivalry between Tessa and Wah, a rivalry that seems to be mostly Tessa's creation. To Tessa, who from the jump is very clearly an unreliable and unlikable narrator, Wah is so good that she's shoving it down your throat. She is so sacrificial to everyone around her in big ways and small ways. But this perception that Tessa has of Wah is really based off of Wah's actions and not anything that she says. She's never like actually explicitly shoving it down your throat. It's just like she clears plates when they have dinner and Tessa's like, oh my god, this fucking bitch. Tessa is immediately defensive with Wah. She is insecure about something here. Definitely about the fact that Wah got to Charlie first, but also maybe about her own intelligence or her own identity, or Wah's relationship to motherhood, which does not reflect Tessa's. The relationship between the mothers and their daughters is in complete stark contrast. Eleanor, Tessa's daughter, is kind of a model child compared to Hatet, who is Wah's daughter. She's like in university, she is very, very, very independent, and her mom doesn't like her very much. Says that she's just like a person that it's really hard to like, but anytime you see any interaction with Eleanor, she seems like a perfectly normal child who was kind of abandoned by her mother and is angry at her for this. And then Hatet, who has been adopted out of trafficking in Malaysia, she acts like a child would if that was their experience. She acts out. She has a really, really strong, abrasive attitude. She's doing a lot of things that her parents don't totally agree with, and yet she's treated with full love and acceptance. With Hatet, Charlie and Wah are having some problems because they disagree with how to treat her relationship with a homeless boy who's squatting in the dilapidated house next door to them. Wah and Hatet seem to have a much closer relationship than Hatet and Charlie, but Charlie is the one that wants this boy to stay away from her, that thinks that she needs to be protected from him. I will say it is a little bit unclear whether or not Hatet and Charlie are as distant as Tessa makes them out to be. It is a lot nicer for Tessa to understand Charlie as outcast from his family, because she's in love with him and she is very jealous of the fact that he has a family. It's about 15 pages into the book at the start of chapter 2 where you learn that this is a confession that Tessa is writing to someone who has requested it, and you learn that Wah is dead. Tessa is relaying the development of her and Charlie's relationship and her rivalry with Wah. Her and Charlie's relationship is mostly just them debating and philosophizing and intellectualizing, and it's a little bit pretentious, but it's definitely meant to be, and it's a critique of that pretension. Charlie has become so central in Tessa and even Milton's life because of how much he values connection. Everyone in this book has a really strong philosophical viewpoint, and Charlie's centers around his valuing of connection and the very quick way he jumps to intimacy and like sharing his deepest thoughts and desires and making you feel close to him. Though Tessa is to some degree obsessed with Charlie, and this book is entirely from her perspective about their relationship, which does not ever evolve into anything more, you don't really get to see all that much of Charlie's personality. He's definitely hidden behind walls of being a philosopher. Like, the philosophers that he studies are a filter between him and the world, giving him a way to look at and engage with the world, and because of that, we never really get to see that intimacy that Tessa speaks of. And that might be because she sees every one-on-one conversation with him as veiled confessions of his love for her, of declarations that he wants to leave his wife and that she should leave her husband. Tessa is always trying to undermine Wah because she's bitterly jealous of her and she wants to put her down so that she can feel more important in Charlie's life. She justifies this undermining and this cruelty by telling herself that she's acting in service to all women. She sees herself as a feminist, but her feminism is very, very theoretical. So in practice, what it really is just a justification for treating other women poorly in the name of feminism. It's like any hatred or spite she feels is reasonable to her because she sees herself as more intelligent than everyone else and sees women who are like comfortably fitting into the role of mother or wife as taking all women back 100 years. The vicious intellectual and moral rivalry between the two women ends in a fight in a restaurant, a massive blow-up fight, which is really just a drunken tirade from Tessa, who accuses Wah of being an insult to womankind because of her tolerance and willingness to understand the man who's trying to flip the house next door where the homeless boy lives, who treats women kind of like objects, and who that morning had ogled Tessa. Not only is she weaponizing feminism here like she's been doing throughout her relationship with Wah, she's also at the end here just throwing every jab she can, trying her best to hurt Wah, telling her that she's a bad mother, telling her that Charlie wants to leave her in front of both men. Tessa and Milton are staying in their house that night, and they get into a huge fight when they get back, but Tessa just storms out and she goes looking for Charlie, who had left the restaurant and not returned. She can't find him, so she goes to sleep on a cot in his study and then is woken in the night by Hatet and the homeless boy who lives next door, and she realizes that Charlie, despite saying a lot of mean things about this boy and wanting him out of Hatet's life, has been harboring him in the study and letting him sleep there, and she is in his bed. After this fight, they don't hear from Charlie or Wah for months until Charlie emails and says that Wah has died in a tragic fire and they're invited to the funeral. A little while after the funeral, Charlie comes to visit them and he brings with him his new woman, Melissa, who he had actually been having an affair with throughout the entire course of this story. We learn that Charlie has a lot of guilt for what happened to Wah because he had left her that night that they had the big fight, and he feels some responsibility for protecting her, feels like things maybe would have been different if he had been there. Wah had gone into the house when it was on fire to save the boy who was inside, and they both died. It's interesting that Charlie has a lot of old-fashioned ideas about women that he can kind of like intellectualize and make seem sort of valid, but that in any other case, Tessa would of course fight against. She's able to look past it because it's Charlie. He tells her that Hatet has gone back to Malaysia to stay at the nunnery that he had adopted her out of, and he says that if her or her daughter Eleanor want to stay in his empty house, they're welcome to. He kind of knows that her and Milton are on the brink of divorce. And she does leave him, and she takes Charlie up on this offer and stays in his house for a while. Here, she strikes up a relationship with Dwayne, who owns that property next door. He's the man who is going to flip it, and Dwayne says that she should read Wah's book, and he gifts it to her, and she reads it, and she kind of understands Wah a little bit more. Then she gets in contact with the nun who's taking care of Hatet, who we learn is the person who has asked her to write this book, the person that she every so often addresses. From meeting with this nun, she learns that Wah had been writing a story about her called My Nemesis, and she hunts through the house and she finds the manuscript. And here we really get to see more of Wah's perspective, and we get to see some venom from her, this woman who had been so kind and generous to Tessa, who was only ever vicious to her. So that's the end of the book. She understands Wah a little bit more, sees a little bit more from her perspective, but obviously hasn't changed all that much because all of this had been written after she had read that manuscript. It's kind of a nothing burger ending. I think that by no means was this book boring, but it also wasn't that interesting. Actually, no, I take that back. It was boring, but it wasn't slow. It managed to compel me, even though, like, truly nothing happens in here. Mostly, it's a character study, and that's fine, and I think that it is probably a good character study. I just personally didn't care enough about these characters to do any of the analysis that I think is necessary to fully appreciate this work. It's got an interesting exploration of women who do or do not fit into the roles assigned to them, like mother and wife and scholar, and there is an interesting use and critique of academic feminism. I think it was just dramatic and messy enough that it kept me reading even through the endless intellectualizing. Like, I just did not care all that much about the debates between Charlie and Tessa. I did want more of what happens in the beginning when you see how unreliable and horrible Tessa is as a person. Like, she'll be having a conversation with her daughter, and her daughter will say something about her that you know to be true, and she'll be like, how dare she say something like that to me? And then she'll say what she says back, and she'll say, maybe I raised my voice a little bit. And you know that she's just like totally misrepresenting the situation, and that she lacks any and all self-awareness. I also loved that she hated Wah because Wah was a good person. That was endlessly fascinating to me. Like I think I already said, this has an extremely pretentious and academic voice that I do think really works and is not overly dense. Every once in a while, I think it went a little bit too far and kind of made me roll my eyes, like this. I'll never forget Milton's harrowed look as he stared at me then. It was a look that said, if I still held you in a certain trust until a moment ago, now the precious membrane of our togetherness has been irretrievably torn. Get a grip. Like, come on, that's a little bit much. This is a solid piece of work. For me personally, there was not really anything to hate other than like really that one line, which I did definitely hate. There also wasn't all that much to love. It was quite forgettable, but I don't think that that would necessarily be everyone else's experience with this book. I think my personal issue with this book is just that the last 3 books I've read, I wanted it to go like balls to the fucking wall insane. I love when people are obsessive in stories and it's not realistic. I love when they are completely fucking unhinged about it. And while in The Collector he does fully kidnap a woman, I don't think I really got exactly what I wanted out of any of these books. They were all very skilled pieces of fiction, but they were very much rooted in reality. They felt very realistic in the ways that obsession was portrayed. And sometimes I just want like absolute fucking craziness. That I think is the issue. This was the 3rd book I read that just like didn't really go there. And I just personally prefer when it does go there. So if you have any recommendations for books that fit the bill on obsession, but it's like complete, like what the fuck is wrong with this person? Like you need to be locked up, kind of The Collector, but I just want a little bit more. Please let me know. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.